June Clausen and I, Brian Walters, married right out of college after a 3-year affair. Although we graduated the same year, I was 3 years older than June because I had served in the Peace Corps for 2 years before going to college. Although both families were happy with our choice of partner, perhaps the happiest was my mother-in-law, Cheryl. Cheryl was especially happy because not only did she seem to like me, but my affair with June and our subsequent engagement, wedding preparation, and wedding allowed her to experience all of this indirectly, as she had never had that experience herself. Cheryl became pregnant as a teenager and had a very difficult time becoming a single mom, largely because her jealously religious parents effectively disowned her. A few years later, when she was 21, she married a much older man, just to have some financial security to provide for June. Cheryl never had a romance, a full-blown engagement, or even anything more than a modest wedding, as her husband Sam Clausen had been married before and wanted something simple. Sam is a decent guy and took good care of Cheryl and June, but he was as boring as standing water and as romantic as a doorknob. I, for my part, always liked Cheryl. Since she's only 11 years older than me, I don't really look at her as a typical mother-in-law, more like a young aunt. In fact, she's just as good-looking as her daughter, though 3 inches shorter than June, with green eyes instead of blue and not as sensual. Her pretty face usually has a dazzling smile on it, and she's very kind. For a pretty girl like her, she is shy and always wears conservative clothes. Perhaps this is ingrained in her because of her past, including her parents constantly calling her a slut. June and I had been married for 4 years when Sam died of a heart attack. It wasn't really a surprise because of his lifestyle, but Cheryl took it hard. I settled Sam's estate for Cheryl, gave her a shoulder to cry on, and even more than June, included her in our lives so that combined with the charity work she was doing, Cheryl stayed busy. The one thing she didn't want help with or even discussion about was that she didn't date. There were literally dozens of guys I knew, some much younger, who wanted to date her, but she had no interest. Shortly after my 6-year wedding anniversary, I realized I was in the standard situation of the clueless husband being cheated on by a conniving wife. I may have been clueless, but I wasn't indecisive. When June's cheating was confirmed, I moved out of our apartment into an extended stay motel and immediately split all of our finances. I believe June really did love me, but lost her way and didn't consider her short-term affair with someone she supposedly had no emotional attachment to as serious. She accused me of overreacting. I know that June confided in Cheryl. I never called her mom or anything like that, just Cheryl, and asked her to stand up for her. I know this because 3 days after I moved out of our apartment, Cheryl visited me at an extended stay motel. When she knocked on the door, I was surprised to see her, but considering how kind she had always been to me and how much I liked her, I invited her in. We sat down on the couch next to each other and she took my hand. "I'm so sorry, Brian. I think you know I didn't raise June that way." "I know, Cheryl," I replied, squeezing her hand. "You've always impressed me as a moral person. You've overcome the bumps in life's road, and June's actions have nothing to do with you." "How are you holding up?" she asked with a tear in one eye. "I'm fine. It was a shock, but I've never been indecisive, so I took the bull by the horns and moved out. I'll probably be in pain for a long time, but I'll get over it." "Is there any chance you can forgive June and take her back?" "I don't see how I can do that, especially since she thinks I'm overreacting. It doesn't occur to her how much she's hurt me." I had a tear in my eye this time. We talked for an hour, and not just about June, but about other things. When she got up to leave, she hugged me. Longer than she should have, considering she was still my mother-in-law. And as soon as she broke contact, she said seriously, looking me in the eye, "I hope your divorce from June won't mean your divorce from me." "Cheryl, there will always be a place in my heart for you." After Cheryl left, I felt better. By advocating for my daughter, she reaffirmed that I had a right to feel the way I felt, didn't try to pressure me, and acted like a true friend, not a mother-in-law. That is, I felt better about myself until I went to bed that night. I woke up in a sweat from a very, very inappropriate dream. I filed for divorce due to irreconcilable differences a week after I moved out of our apartment and notified the landlord that I was no longer responsible for the rent. June was very upset. I couldn't understand why she was so upset. What did she think I should have done? At that point, she had known me for 9 years, and I had never in any way misrepresented myself to her. June and her lawyer tried many tactics, including seeking counseling, so things didn't go smoothly for the first 3 months. I was in a bit of shock at the time, but I didn't back down from my principles. I probably would have taken it harder if 2 of my single male friends hadn't taken it upon themselves to encourage me, and Cheryl called me every week not only to see how I was doing, although she always expressed concern about that, but with uplifting stories, mostly from her charity work. We also had lunch once a month, at which time she was always in high spirits. The paperwork had been stale for about 3 months, and so at 1 o'clock on Monday afternoon, we had a preliminary hearing before a justice of the peace. June had requested counseling, but my attorney was able to successfully rebut this by showing pictures of June going to lunch with George at least twice since the divorce papers had been filed. George was the very co-worker with whom she was having an affair, while she emphatically and tearfully stated that she had not had any sexual contact with him since I left. The fact that she had not distanced herself from him caused the judge to deny her request for compulsory counseling. Everyone at the hearing knew this was probably the funeral bell for a marriage that would likely be dissolved in 3 months. On Tuesday, Cheryl called into work. It was unusual for her to call me at work, but I was always glad to get her calls. After an initial exchange of pleasantries, she cut to the chase. "You can probably guess, Brian, that June called me yesterday after the hearing, very upset, since it looks like the divorce is coming up in a few months. Is that what you think, too?" "Yes, Cheryl, I do. I'm very sad about it, but I have to move on. My attorney feels that we will be able to properly settle all the money issues, so a final judgment is expected in about 3 months. I thought you might be sad, so let me take you out to dinner on Friday. It wouldn't be humiliating for you to go out to dinner with your soon-to-be ex-mother-in-law, would it? If you're uncomfortable, I can wear a mask." I managed to get a chuckle out of that. "No, that would be fine. And no, you don't need to wear a mask. I just don't think I'd be very good company." "I'll feed you some good food, and you'll feel better. I know you're not a very good cook. So what time should I pick you up on Friday?" I grinned, since not a very good cook was more of a compliment. "I'll pick you up or meet you at the restaurant." "Absolutely not. It's my treat. Don't argue. I'll pick you up, say 7 p.m. "Okay, agreed. Tuesday night, I had another very disturbing dream. I'm going to have to see a psychiatrist if they continue. To my shock, not surprise, but shock, when Cheryl knocked on my apartment door at 7:02 Friday night, she wasn't dressed in the conservative clothes she always wore. She was wearing a stylish deep-neck blouse, a short skirt, 3-inch heels to match the skirt, light makeup, she almost never wears makeup, that emphasized her charming emerald green eyes, and a new hairstyle that made her pretty face even prettier. She certainly didn't look 43, more like 30. Cheryl stared at me with concern on her face. "Wow, you dressed so beautifully," I said as my jaw started working again. "Thank you," she replied, clearly relieved by my words. "The restaurant is pretty upscale, and I didn't want to look like I didn't belong there." "Is that a new outfit?" Yeah. I bought it and a few other things this week. I thought it was time to stop wearing the old-fashioned clothes I've always worn." Cheryl went to a restaurant that happened to have a dance floor as well. Unfortunately, as she was driving, her skirt went up to her hip. I had never seen her thighs before and chided myself for thinking, that looks slim. Dinner was enjoyable, and Cheryl's optimistic demeanor was contagious, so much so that I almost forgot about the nasty divorce. It was unusual, however, how Cheryl drank alcohol. Usually she only has 1 glass of wine when she goes out to dinner. This evening she bought a bottle for 2, but since I rarely drink and only had 1 glass, she finished the rest. After dinner, she lured me to the dance floor. The only times I danced with her were at June's reception and wedding, and a couple nights after Sam died when June and I took her out. She turned down a lot of offers from other guys to dance then. She was a pretty plain step dancer, back then. Now she was a firecracker. After 6 or 7 dances, we took a break. She went to the bathroom and I took a table. When she came back, I asked, "How did you learn to dance like that?" I pride myself on being a good dancer, sir, for a guy, but she was clearly better than me. I've been taking lessons once a week for most of the last year, she smiled. Did I do okay? You were close to being the best dancer there, and you sure looked up to a lot of guys, I grinned. Oh, I didn't, she blushed. Just then, as if on cue, a guy came up to us and asked me if I would mind if he danced with my date. A little taken aback, I realized that from the way Cheryl looked, people could easily mistake her for my date. When I regained my composure, I said, "That's up to my mother-in-law." He looked very embarrassed. Cheryl slapped me on the arm and said with a smile, "He's joking. However, since this is only our second date, I don't want to disappoint him, especially since some hot young thing will snatch him up. So thank you so much for your invitation, but I decline it. However, if he dumps me, I'm sure I'll see you here again." She laughed, placing her left hand on mine. The guy smiled, then kissed her right hand and walked away. "You're a pretty damn cute girl," I told her. At that moment, a waiter came over to our table and placed something that looked like a Bloody Mary in front of her and a soda in front of me. "We didn't order," I started to say when she interrupted me. "I ordered on the way back from the bathroom. Now have a drink and then let's go back to the dance floor." I'd never seen her drink hard liquor before, but she quickly managed a Bloody Mary, and I finished my soda, and we went back to the dance floor. After another 5 or 6 dances, Cheryl leaned over to me and said, "I think I've reached my limit, both in terms of alcohol and dancing. Will you drive me home? I shouldn't be driving. I may be drunk. I don't know because I've never been drunk before, but I'm pretty sure I can't drive without crashing into something." I took the car from the valet while Cheryl went to the bathroom again, and then drove to her house. She lived in a small, elegant house in a close, fairly fashionable suburb. Sam had left her some pretty substantial money, which was about 8 miles from my apartment. I can just take a cab to get home. Cheryl was very chatty in the car, repeating several times, I wrote it off as drinking, that she hoped I had a good time and forgot about her cheating daughter for a while. When we got to her house, she was fiddling with her garage keys. I took them from her and unlocked the door and helped her in. As soon as she got inside, she closed the garage door and clearly slid the deadbolt shut. She then pulled something out of her purse and held it out to me. "I took these off in the bathroom as a souvenir for you," she giggled. It was her panties. I'm sure I blushed, but it was nothing compared to what followed. After she handed me her panties and I silently opened and closed my mouth, I was stunned, and she suddenly dropped her skirt. When I said, "What are you?" she literally ripped off her blouse, undoing the buttons and exposing her bra underneath. I had always imagined that underneath her old-fashioned clothes was a beautiful body, so here it was. She actually had a stunning body that made every woman in the world envious. Cheryl walked over to me, and as she covered my shoulders, neck, and cheeks with short kisses, she continued to murmur something. I don't think I remembered or understood all the words she muttered, but some that I remembered were, "I'm sure you haven't slept with anyone in months, and you need someone to blow your brains out." That statement stuck in my head, partly because I'd never heard her say "hook up" before. "I'm as horny as you are." "I've been sexually unsatisfied for decades, and I need you to do something about it. Pretend I'm just a slut you picked up at a bar and not your mother-in-law." While she was saying this, my mind couldn't help but go back to the 2 dreams that had been bothering me so much over the past few days. In those dreams, I was ripping Cheryl's clothes off and then having her until she was senseless. In this fantasy, her body was only half as good as it was in real life. As soon as Cheryl put her hands down, I lost my temper. As I carried her to the bedroom, I remember that the first thought in my head was that I was really going to regret this in the morning. However, I was sure that, at least not tonight. When we finally unhooked, I was physically and emotionally drained. There was no way I was going to get up and leave, especially with her saying, "Please stay the night, Brian. I've never woken up with someone I love before." Love? What the fuck? I had to push that statement to the back of my mind for a while. When she rested her head on my shoulder, I quickly fell into a deep sleep. I've been known to have a few erotic dreams at night. I don't usually remember the dreams, but this time I remembered them the next morning. They all involved me either blowing Cheryl's brains out or making love to her. My last dream turned out to be a reality. "Thank you for the best night and morning of my life," Cheryl said, her enchanting green eyes fixed on mine with laser-like intensity. "Is this some weird world where a hot chick screwed me twice with world-class sex and then thanked me?" I grinned. Really hot chick?" she stammered. "Hell yeah." We had a pleasant conversation. Pleasant because I hadn't gotten down to the nitty-gritty of sex with my mother-in-law yet, but I knew that eventually it would be like a sword of Damocles hanging over my head. Finally, she smiled and said, "Let's take a shower together," followed by a quick kiss. "Sounds like fun," I replied, but just before I started to roll off the bed, she grabbed me and tearfully said, "I'm sorry for saying I love you. Despite the weight of my emotions, having her and then having to deal with her saying she loved me and then telling me she was sorry for saying it, we had a fun shower together." Since this was a time of firsts, I got the distinct impression that this was the first time she had showered with a man, and she was as excited as a puppy. Cheryl was only wearing a short robe as she made breakfast. She was literally singing to herself, doing it with a smile glued to her face. We chatted sweetly over breakfast. She looked so charming and happy. In fact, with the exception of my wedding to June, I think it was the happiest I'd ever seen her. After breakfast, I insisted she get dressed while I did the dishes. She changed into jean shorts, another nice blouse, and casual flat-soled shoes, and I was struck again by how young she looked, and how wide her hips were. She drove me to my apartment, and when we got there, she asked, "Maybe you could show me your apartment. I've never seen it." "Sure," I replied. She seemed a little anxious at first, but I couldn't say for sure. Then, when we got to the bedroom, it didn't take long since the apartment wasn't that big, she sighed heavily and put her hands on my chest. "Brian, could you please fuck me in your bed?" she asked timidly. Somehow, the combination of her vulnerability, how sweet she was, how great the sex in her house was, and the impact of my recent dream of fucking her turned me into an animal. We slept together in my bedroom. "Did you like it?" "Yes, of course, but I'm not sure I can take it on a regular basis. I'm completely exhausted, and I feel like my spine has turned to jelly," she laughed. I rubbed her back, and then she rubbed mine. We must have been in bed for about an hour when she asked, "Am I interfering with your plans for the day?" I guess my plans for the day changed after that night. Let's go to the movies tonight." Her smile was as bright as a lit Christmas tree. "Instead, why don't you come over for dinner and we can watch a movie on my big screen TV?" "That sounds appealing," I grinned. "What time should I come over?" "How about 5:30? You can help me chop the vegetables. I'm making a terrible roast." When Cheryl left, I took a moment to reflect. "What the fuck are you doing, asshole?" I asked myself. "It's your goddamn mother-in-law. How fucked up is that, not to mention the effect it would have on her relationship with her daughter if June ever found out? Besides, she's probably already in love with you, and do you really want to hurt her even though she's the best woman you've ever met in your life?" Thinking about that last statement made me cover my face with my hands and mutter, "Oh shit, and you dreaming about her." After my thoughts remained in turmoil for the next half hour, I finally decided to throw the can on the road. "I'll just go with the flow this weekend and come to some conclusion later." The competing factions in my brain finally agreed. Throwing the can on the road did indeed lead to a wonderful weekend. We had fun cooking dinner together on Saturday night. We watched half a movie before we slept together on the couch in her office. We actually made love in her bed Saturday night. We went to the health club she is a faithful member of to work out late Sunday morning, and in the afternoon we went camping in the nearby wilderness. We also had enough energy to make love Sunday night in her bed. When I woke up Monday morning, I was the most serene I had ever been in my life. That serenity was shattered shortly after breakfast when Cheryl asked if we could talk before I left for work. I had brought a change of clothes with me. "Brian, could you please listen to what I have to say before you answer or ask questions?" she asked in a timid voice. "This is really hard for me, and I should just say what I have planned without interrupting." "Okay," I smiled, squeezing her hands. After a long sigh, she started and didn't stop for 15 minutes. barely breathing, so tense was she, and not faltering on her words, but expressing herself quite clearly. Her first words were, "I have loved you from the first time I met you, and you are the only man I have ever loved." After explaining this, she went on to say that she knew a long-term relationship with me was impossible because she was 11 years older. Her relationship with June would be ruined. She would never be able to give me the children I wanted, and she knew I could never love her the way she loved me. She concluded by saying, "I will, however, accept whatever I can get from you. I will always be available to you." I was stunned. I remained silent as she spoke. When she finished, she said, "Go to work. I apologize for putting so much on you." I kissed her passionately. Then I looked into her enchanting eyes and said, "I have a lot of things to think about. Please don't be upset if we don't see each other for a couple of weeks. Although I'm usually a determined person, this weekend has completely turned my brain upside down and I need to organize it." She smiled, gave me a quick kiss on the lips, stood up, picked me up, and then playfully pushed me out the door. I wasn't exaggerating when I said the mess in my head. For the next 2 weeks, whenever my mind wasn't fully occupied with work or some other activity, it turned to Cheryl, June, sex, and anxiety. It didn't help that almost every night I dreamed I was not only having Cheryl, but making love to her, traveling to exotic places with her, snuggling up to her, and in one disturbing dream, she and I had a dozen children. Until I saw Cheryl, I called her every day just to chat for 5 or 10 minutes. She never pressed me or got serious during our phone conversations, except to say in passing that the last time she saw her daughter, June asked if she was seeing anyone because, "You look as happy as I've ever seen you, Mom." Cheryl just said nothing. 2 weeks later, I invited Cheryl over for dinner on Saturday night. She happily accepted. Although I really hadn't planned it, I was just trying to see how compatible we were outside of bed. I ended up staying the night in her bed and making love twice. I knew I was actually falling in love with her, but because of the 11-year age difference, and mostly because she was still my mother-in-law, I couldn't show my inherent determination. Our relationship at least survived the final divorce. Afterward, Cheryl took June on a week-long cruise. When Cheryl returned, she said that the cruise had helped June a great deal and that her anger toward me for throwing her to the curb had diminished and almost completely disappeared, and that June seemed to have realized that she had only herself to blame. "Did she ask about your love affair?" I inquired. After a long pause, Cheryl replied, "Yes. How was it?" Another long pause followed. I told her that I was happy, that I didn't know if I would be in a long-term relationship, and that I had no plans to introduce her to a boyfriend anytime soon. My indecision might have continued for many more months, even years, had a catastrophic event not occurred. I had correctly concluded that I loved Cheryl, and we were together at least 3 nights a week and talked on the phone every day. Even though I enjoyed being married to June for 5+ years, but to be honest with myself, my relationship with Cheryl was much better than my relationship with June. Yes, despite her age, Cheryl had been sexually inexperienced the first night we spent together. But now she was not only experienced, but as expressive, loving, adventurous, and energetic as could be. A catastrophic event hit me when Cheryl called my office early Friday afternoon. We had plans to go to a play that night and then, of course, play hide-and-seek in bed that night. She was in tears and begged me to come to her house as soon as possible. I was able to get to her house a little after 3 o'clock in the afternoon. When Cheryl opened the door, it was obvious that she had been crying and immediately threw herself into my arms. I let her cry on my shoulder for a few minutes and then carried her to the couch in the living room. "Okay, tell me what's going on," I said, holding her hands. "I swear I didn't plan this," she sobbed, and then continued in sentence fragments such as, "I didn't know it was possible. Please don't hate me. You can just go away." I had no idea what she was talking about. I finally calmed her down, squeezed her hands, looked her straight in the eyes, and said, "Stop. Tell me what's on your mind. I have no idea what you're talking about." She sniffed her nose, took a deep breath, and said, "I'm 7 weeks pregnant." This was news to me. We had talked to her about this before, and she was sorry she couldn't get pregnant because she knew I wanted kids. She'd tried with Sam, but it hadn't worked out. And even earlier, some doctor had told her after she'd given birth to June years ago that for some reason she no longer remembered, she probably couldn't get pregnant again. Since I was stunned, I didn't say anything for a while, but I'm sure my eyes widened. Cheryl took this to mean that I was upset and would now probably throw her overboard, and she started sobbing so hard that I thought I might need emergency medical attention. My mind suddenly cleared. I loved her more than I had ever loved anyone before. I really wanted at least one child. I didn't care if she was older than me. It was time to make a decision, and the decision was clear. I took her face in both hands and wiped the tears away with my thumbs. "Stop crying, Cheryl. I want to ask you something." After repeating this about a dozen times, she finally stopped. I asked, "Will you make me the happiest man in the world and marry me?" Apparently, she didn't take it right away because I had to ask 2 more times before she understood my words, smiled, and cried out, "Yes!" Her tears dried up. We pressed against each other. I told her how much I loved her. She told me she had been the happiest woman for the last 6 months and was even happier now. Suddenly, we heard the front door open and, "Mom, are you in here?" We were like frightened rabbits as we turned at the sound and saw June walk into the living room. She was as startled as we were. June spoke first. "What are you doing here, Brian?" I couldn't answer. Suddenly, Cheryl's mouth snapped up words that I'm sure she didn't intend to say at that moment. "I'm 7 weeks pregnant with Brian's baby, and we're getting married." A slight smile appeared on June's face. She obviously thought it was a joke at first. When she saw how big my eyes were and saw my intimate embrace with Cheryl, the smile disappeared and my eyes began to glaze over. I immediately jumped up and caught her before her head hit the floor. I picked June up and carried her over to the couch that Cheryl had just vacated. Cheryl threw herself into the fray. She pulled out some smelling salts and a cold compress. Before using them, she turned to me and said, "I think it would be best if you left before she came to her senses." Then she asked with a smile, "Can we go shopping for wedding rings tomorrow?" "You bet," I replied, kissing her soundly. "I'll give the tickets for tonight's play to a friend. Just call me what time I should pick you up tomorrow." We kissed again and I left. I did give my tickets to a friend and his wife, who were happy to get them, and I even babysat their kids, a boy and a girl, as a workout. Ha, ha. We didn't go ring shopping on Saturday. Cheryl called me around noon and told me that June was staying the night and that they would probably need the rest of the weekend to get everything sorted out. I couldn't argue with her. I told her I loved her and we would go shopping when we could. Hey! Cheryl ended the conversation by telling me what she would do to me the next time she got me into bed. "Hopefully that will be Monday," she grinned before hanging up. I don't know everything Cheryl and June were talking about, of course. What I do know for sure is that Cheryl loved June as much as a mother can love a grown child, despite June's mistake with George, and that June and Cheryl had been a team for years before I met them. Cheryl told me that she was completely honest with June about her long-term feelings for me, that she never had any romantic or sexual contact with me until she knew for sure that my marriage to June was over. Cheryl said she realized how awkward our marriage would be for June, but Cheryl needed June in her life now as much as she did before. I have to hand it to June. While she herself was sad about the situation, she was happy for her mother, who she knew had never had true love before, and was happy to have a younger sister or brother. Although June and I were not going to be friends in the future, I made it clear to her that I held no grudge against her, that I would always treat her with respect, and that I had done nothing to hurt her. I just couldn't help but fall in love with Cheryl. Cheryl really turned me to ashes after a weekend, and another weekend later I moved into Cheryl's house. The only problem we had, if you could call it that, was that the pregnancy had increased Cheryl's already high libido. "I need to make up for 2 decades without real sex," was how she put it, and who was I to object? We continued to do it steadily until 8 months and a week into the pregnancy, at which point we had to put it off until 2 months after the birth of our beautiful little girl, Alicia. During our sexual interlude, Cheryl chirped, "Maybe June will take the slack for you." I nearly had a heart attack before she laughed. "Joking!" Then, pressing her 8-month pregnant body against me, she said, "No one will ever have you again. I would give my life for you." Cheryl and I were married in a simple ceremony 2 months before Alicia was born. We gave June the utmost respect. She was a bridesmaid. Although I completely forgave June, my approach to George, her lover, with whom Cheryl said June never had sex again after I began divorce proceedings, was different. I followed him electronically and even followed him occasionally for a day or two with the help of a private investigator. When I found out he was getting married, I sent his fiancée a complete dossier on his relationship with June when she was married to me and how it ruined our marriage. I was pleased to see that George's fiancée dumped him within a week of receiving my letter, and he soon moved to another city. After Alicia was born, we decided that we would like her to have a sibling. However, another pregnancy for Cheryl, and right after Alicia, we didn't think it was desirable or safe. Since Sam had left her a lot of money, we harvested one of her eggs and hired a surrogate. When Alicia was 15 months old, the surrogate gave birth to our second and final child, a little boy we named Aaron. As I write this, my children are now 5 and 6 years old. I am more in love with Cheryl than I have ever been. I never imagined that a relationship could be this good and that we could maintain our sexual relationship with the intensity that we have. One more thing. June married a guy that Cheryl and I like, and she's due to give birth to a little girl next month. For a while, I tried to figure out what kind of relationship her daughter would have with our kids. I've given up. All I know is that Cheryl will love her granddaughter as much as she loves our children. Cheryl seems to have an infinite capacity to love.